Welcome. Welcome everybody to the Benicia Library, to the Donna Benicia Room. And our painting up here is Donna Benicia herself, General Vallejo's wife. And General Vallejo is, the city of Vallejo is named after him, and Benicia is named after his wife. My name is Linda Wright, and I am your hostess today. And this event is co-sponsored by our library. And so say thank you to them for having a program like this. Mary Susan Gass, who is a poet, a community leader here in Benicia, she came last year and she saw the poster of Fannie Lou Hamer just that day when she came into the library. She came straight in here, sat down, and she was amazed because she was actually one of the persons who went to Freedom Summer to work with Fannie Lou Hamer in 1964. She unfortunately broke her arm. I will be talking about Fannie Lou Hamer, portraying her, and I'm going to be weaving in some of Mary Susan Gass' story with my presentation. It's very fascinating. It was wonderful having her here last year talking. So hopefully next year on October 6th, you'll be back and you'll be able to hear her if she doesn't tell it somewhere else, her story, because she hasn't told her story. Mm-hmm. She hasn't told that story to anyone. So she said, I just exploded bombs inside of her head and her heart to remember that summer that really, truly changed her life. So just take a time to remember her and that she have a speedy recovery. Fannie Lou Hamer. She was born in 1917 in Montgomery County, Mississippi. She was the 20th child of her parents. And her parents moved to the Delta area, which is in the northwest portion of Mississippi, when Fannie Lou was 5 years old. And she grew up hungry and barefoot. And I don't want you to think it was because her parents had 20 children that she was hungry and barefoot. No, she lived in a period of segregation. Now, if you think of sharecropping as a business, her parents had 20 employees. Now, another family might have 5 children, and they had 5 employees. Now, why would the 5 employees and the 20 employees, a company with 20 employees, be hungry and poor as the one with 5? It wasn't because of the number of children. It's because they were cheated out of their wages. They were cheated out of their wages. Fannie Lou Hamer, she was a timekeeper. That meant she counted how many bales of cotton came in by each person, and she was honest. And when Mr. Marlowe wasn't around, she had her counterweights. And she would do as honest as she could, and she hated when he was there and she had to cheat, and she knew it was wrong. And then when they paid him money from the company store. They didn't pay him in US dollars. Each plantation had their own money, and they had to go to the commissary to spend it. No, her parents picked tons of cotton with their 20 employees. They should have been living in a nice house, having shoes and food. But Fannie Lou's mother had a magical hill. Every once in a while, she had to go to that hill and get some magic dirt to cook for their family. She went to school. The school for the black children in Mississippi went from December to March, when the cotton harvest was not in bloom. Otherwise, she was planting and chopping and picking cotton. And she had a really good teacher, and she excelled in school, but it was just too short. And going 4 months, even though she went till 6th grade, still was really more like 2nd or 3rd grade. But because she did learn so well, that's how she later, when she married Pap Hamer, who was a really good man to her, She was able to be that timekeeper. She was also a maid for on the Marlowe plantation for Mr. D. Marlowe and his family. But one day, and also she adopted 2 children. She wasn't able to have children. They don't know why. Maybe it's because she didn't get the nutrition as she had when she was a child. And she went into the hospital because she had a pain in her side. But what was known in Mississippi was a Mississippi appendectomy. I can't say it right, my husband. What's the word? Appendectomy. Thank you. I have trouble saying words, so just laugh, it's okay. And that was common. More than 50% of the black women in Mississippi had that in the 1940s and the 50s and the 60s. They go into the hospital for one thing, they come out not able to bear any more children. And again, it's not because they had so many children, it's because they were cheated by their wages. And then those commissary stores, the prices were very high. So it was a no-win situation, and that exasperated poverty throughout Mississippi, particularly in the Delta. So we are going to move from Mississippi to Alabama. But one more thing I want to say about Fannie Lou Hamer before we move on is that she went to Ma Tucker's house one day, and it was in the summer of 1961. And she said, "Ma Tucker, how you doing today?" And Ma Tucker said, "I'm doing really good, Fannie Lou. Come on in and sit on my porch. I had 2 visitors today." Who were they? They were the Freedom Riders. You know, those men who went up from Washington, D.C. on the buses, and they tried to integrate the buses. There was black men, white woman, black woman, and they all come on the buses, and they would go into the bus terminals or sit in the lunchrooms. You know, in Alabama, they didn't treat them very well in Alabama. Boy, they rioted, those white folk did, seeing them together, and they burned the bus down. But our governor, Ross Barnett, you know, he went and put them in Parchman Prison, that old place 14 miles down the road from Brewville. Ooh, we had them in their striped suits and their chain gangs, and they're out there picking that cotton. For 6 months, those Freedom Riders. But they're out now, and 2 of them come to my house. Ooh, Fannie Lou, you never seen some men looking so good. Ooh. Well, what they want to do with you, Tuck? They want us to go to a mass meeting tonight down at Williams Chapel. Oh, that ain't gonna do no good. I ain't going. And Ma Tuck said, "You sure? I think you would really like it." Well, a little bit later, Fannie Lou come back, and she repented. And she said, "I'm gonna come." So she went to Williams Chapel, and when she went into the front door, she was a poor, downtrodden, hungry woman. But when she left, she was changed forever. And she became a mighty civil rights worker. So that's a little bit about Fannie Lou Hamer. After the break, you'll hear more about this remarkable woman. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Claire, who's going to take us to Alabama. She's going to start off in San Francisco because that's where she was born. She is the 4th generation San Franciscan in her family. She went to college down in Southern California, but she worked with children in Hollywood, teaching them art. Art history was her major. On Highway 395, anyone know where that is in San Bernardino? She had an art mobile. She would drive all through that highway and into the mountains and in the rural areas, taking her art mobile to teach children about art. And another thing she did is she worked with the San Francisco Art Commission. She was the executive director of it. She worked with the Treasure Island Museum. She was president, and she's a member of it. She's not the president now. She is working with Stagebridge, which is a performing arts studio in Oakland, where I've been taking classes since 2008. And Claire is now the board president of Stage Bridge. And you can see Claire at the end will say many of the places where Claire will be storytelling during this month. But one of the things that happened to her is that her very beloved cat, she had to put him down. And she really wanted another cat. So she went on the Nextdoor app, found a cat, and she named her Clementine, Sweet Clementine. All right, so let's give it up for Claire.
Thank you, Linda. That's really a nice introduction. When I decided to go to Selma, I decided in an instant, but there was a great deal that came before it that put me in a mood to go. When I was in my teens, my parents and I drove across the United States. My father stopped at some places to do business. Our first stop was Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'm talking about 1949. And I took a bus somewhere, and I got on, and all the black people were together, you know, and all the white people were together, and I thought, they just want to be together. And then I found out the buses were segregated. And it was a very strange feeling, and I found out later that the black people in Tulsa were under a curfew. They were not allowed out at night after 8 o'clock unless they had a special permit that the city gave them to go and work at some white person's house and cook and serve and help them clean up. That was Tulsa in 1949. Our next stop was in Nashville, Tennessee, in the train station, because we were going to take the train to Montgomery, but it was a kind of a rundown place, but the main waiting room for white people was clean and orderly, and the one for black people was about a fifth of the size, and the people were crowded in there. It looked like it hadn't been painted or anything done to it since the Civil War. It was a mess. It was so obvious, this segregation, what it did to people. And the restroom, same thing, colored, white. So next up is Montgomery, Alabama. Now in Montgomery we had some cousins. Their last name was Black, and they ran very nice men's stores in several of these southern cities. It was a chain like Macy's or any place like that. And it happens to be that the one in Montgomery is actually in the background when you see the time when the people in Montgomery were hosed by fire hoses and knocked down, if you remember that. It's in the background. But anyway, Julius, one of the brothers, had us stay with him. And something rather odd happened. I mean, I was surrounded by this Southern culture, everybody being very nice to me, except in a kind of a sort of a half-hearted way, in a way like being around the swimming pool at the White Country Club and thinking I'd show off my wonderful Pacific Ocean swimming skills, and I dive and I go back and forth, I get out dripping wet. All the Southern girls are sitting around with gardenias in their hair, not a drop of water on them, and they said, "Wow, Cousin Claire, you swim." Wow. That was Montgomery. But something really dark took place when we were there. It seems that a black family had tried to move into a house very close to the white neighborhood, and it was bombed and destroyed. Now, Julius happened to be the head of the local veterans organization, and he took a stand that this was really wrong. He went out publicly, he said in the newspaper, "This you should not be doing. This is the wrong way to deal with things." And for this, he was receiving death threats. So this was quite an education when I was 16 of what it was like in the South. I went to Lowell High School, and there was exactly one black student there who arrived in my junior year. And she was the daughter of a very famous minister, Dr. Howard Thurman, who was the minister of the, I see some nodding heads, and he was the minister of the Unitarian Church, which was desegregated. And my temple, Emmanuel, traded pulpits with Dr. Thurman. He was, I believe, the very first black graduate of the Harvard Divinity School. He was very renowned nationally. His daughter was pretty much alone. There were some Chinese students at Lowell, but they tended to hang together, come together, and leave together, and have lunch together, and there was just no way to ever socialize with them. And here was this girl all by herself. I can't remember her name, but for purposes of this, I'll call her Beth. And I really tried to make friends, and we didn't seem to have classes together, but we'd have lunch together, we'd get together. Comes the end of our senior year, and there is a tradition at Lowell at that time to have a tea for your friends. Now this is an old-fashioned tea where your auntie is at one end and your grandmother's at the other end pouring tea, and you have little sandwiches and little cakes. It was very nice, and you invite your friends over, and I invited a bunch of friends, and I invited Beth, and everything seemed fine. And the next morning I got phone calls from all the other people that I had been invited to and told to not come because I'd invited her to my party. I know that seems incredible today, but that's what happened. So you might say that part of me was kind of revved up to do something about all this, was very angry about the way black people were treated in San Francisco even then. Well, Selma. When Selma happened, it was a colossal thing. For those of you who remember, it's almost like 9/11. It's all anybody could talk about. People were in a state of shock at the way we saw these newsreels over and over again in black and white on television of people being beaten, and it was terrible, and we wanted to know, what can you do? And then it was announced that there would be a march from the Embarcadero up Market Street to the Civic Center, and with lights and everything, and I went on this march. I didn't know anybody, I just went by myself. And there were all these great speakers, people who'd been down at Selma telling us what it was like. And then the great Bishop James Pike of Grace Cathedral, which is on Nob Hill, very eminent liberal, got up and started talking about the conditions down there and how we need bodies, lots more bodies, lots of bodies. We need white bodies down there. And the moment he said that, something hit me in the chest. I had to go. Now the question was, how do I go? I mean, you don't just get on a plane and go to Selma by yourself, right? I mean, this is not possible. And I didn't know what to do until I heard about a group that was meeting at the Macedonian Baptist Church in the Fillmore and was getting a group organized. And I went there and they talked about how they were going to take Delta Airlines, and a fellow named Bill Bradley would be in charge. And Bill was a well-known African-American who had organized a lot of sit-ins having to do with some other issues in San Francisco at the time. And he had been an Army sergeant, and believe me, he believed in discipline. He said, I want to get you there safely, and I want to get you back safely, and you're going to follow my rules or you're not coming with me. He meant it. And while I was sitting there, I feel this little tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there is the minister of the Pentecostal church across the street. He hands me a little velvet, little bag with strings on it, and he says, this is from my church. None of us can go, but we want you to represent us while you're there. It was the most touching thing. These were nickels and dimes that people earn maybe sweeping floors or being maids in hotels, was what they could collect. It moved me so deeply, and I thought, I have a sacred trust here. Well, how do we get there? We met down at SFO, and we boarded Delta Airlines. And Delta was filled with blonde-haired Southern girls as attendants at that time, and they were not very pleased with us. They were rather scornful of us. They knew what was going on. You see, we were all dressed in jeans, which nobody wore in the 60s to go flying. You didn't go in jeans, and we had canteens and backpacks. It was pretty obvious something was different, right? Well, we arrived in Atlanta, and the people in Atlanta saw to it that we had dinner, and we stayed overnight in a church, sleeping on the floor after practicing nonviolent resistance, protecting our heads, and, heard some pep talks and did some singing. The next morning, Bill Bradley says, everybody up, it's going to be a 5-hour trip to Selma through Georgia and Alabama, and we're not stopping for nothing, so you better pee now or else. That's the way it was. And we went through that, and we drove through these. It's so different than California. The side of the roads is red earth and this green, wet environment there. And we saw places where you saw that they had signs, whites only and colored only. And I have a distinct memory of a black couple standing by the side of the road, and they had a shovel and a rake. There was a man and a wife, and it reminded me, if you've ever seen that picture called American Gothic, of a rural couple in overalls. It was just like a black American Gothic, staring at us, knowing maybe who we were in this bus, not saying anything, not showing any emotion, but staring at us. And it was a memorable moment to see this, because everybody was watching us. Well, we arrived in Selma late in the afternoon. The bus drives up to the center of the black community, and we start to get off the bus, and somebody from Selma comes up and says, "Folks, these folks has all come all the way from San Francisco." And everybody started cheering and carrying on, and it was like we'd come from the moon. I mean, they were really, really impressed. I mean, it was a long trip, and they were excited about it. But I felt like we was the Queen of England or something, getting off this bus, and they're cheering and waving at us and all this. It was really exciting and very touching. So soon we were assembled in Brown's Chapel, and those of you, if you remember, that was the meeting place where everything was discussed, was at Brown's Chapel, not far away. And they arranged for housing, and pretty much the young guys had to stay in the church and sleep on the pews, but some of us women and some older people were sent to houses of people who were willing to take us. We arrived at the home of Mrs. Lee, and Mrs. Lee, we must have had 20 people in that house. It was I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 bedrooms, it was a small house, and we slept on the floor, under tables, on tables, back to back on beds, wherever there was a place we could lie down, that was where we slept. And she insisted on making breakfast for us, and we had a lot of fun with that because she saw that we were all carrying this trail mix, and I remember her saying to us, "Is that what you all eat in California?" We had a cultural exchange there. And what we did is we gave her money so she could go shopping. Most of them had boycotted downtown, so they shopped 50 miles away. Somebody went into some town 25, 50 miles away, got a lot of food and brought it to help feed us. And of course, we brought our canteens and our trail mix. I still don't know how they did it. It was a miracle. So comes the day we meet again at Brown's Chapel, where we would get the summary of what was happening during the day. And they explained to us that they'd had, aside from the marches, now I should backtrack and say, the first march was the one where they got beaten up. The second march, they chose to go and to the end of the bridge and sit down, kneel down, and pray. They never went any further, so they weren't bothered. There was to be a third march, which would go to Montgomery, and which everybody was to go 9 miles, but the next 3 days would be a small group selected, about 300 people, to go to Montgomery, and just outside Montgomery, the rest of the people were to reassemble, so there'd be a large people going in. And the reason given for this seemed reasonable. The road was very narrow, 2-lane highway with very narrow shoulders, and to have thousands of people pouring down that highway would have been extremely difficult. So that was the game. In the meantime, they were having little marches throughout Selma to disrupt people. And these people were being arrested and put in jail. And so they decided they would go as a group, and they decided on a new tactic. We were going to go all over Selma in the white part and walk 2 by 2, 2 people, up and down the sidewalk from one street to the other, back and forth in front of the houses, not to interfere, not to go on their lawns or near the houses, just walk peacefully 2 and 2. And I picked a partner named Barbara. We decided we'd go, and they went all over the city dropping us off. And we are walking up and down this sidewalk when all of a sudden I hear doors slamming. People say, "They're there, they're here, they're here." These white people were terrified of 2 white women walking on a sidewalk. It was astonishing. That's how it was there. And gives me the shivers just thinking about it because it was so preposterous. At any rate, pretty soon we started hearing sirens over here, and they were picking people up all over the city, and it was driving them crazy to have to do this, sending out the police cars. Pretty soon the police showed up with us, and they picked up a couple of black Episcopal ministers on the way, wearing their white collars. They were sitting in the back seat, and they said, "Well, what are you all doing here? And you're disturbing the peace and everything." They said, "Are we under arrest?" And, "Get in the car, get in the car." So we get in the car, and we had to sit on the laps of the ministers, who we were all a little bit embarrassed by that. It wasn't quite. And anyway, that's the way it was. We knew things were going to be different. We got to the jail, and they unload us, and we're standing with a whole bunch of other people brought in. And out there is Sheriff Jim Clark, the notorious sheriff of the county, with his swagger stick, which seemed incredibly long. Well, it was a little bit scary, but we were all singing, "We shall overcome," and everything, and all of a sudden he yells, "You stop that goddamn singing, or I'm going to bust all your heads." And he meant it, and we went silent. And I had a moment when I thought, I'm Jewish, I thought, was this what it was like for Jews when they were rounded up by the Nazis? That's how I felt. At any rate, they marched us through the jail, and then somehow or other they marched us out. They never put us in a jail cell. We couldn't figure out what they were doing, and they put us back on the bus. And the bus goes, it's now nighttime, and we go to a rundown building. It turns out to be the, quote, Negro Community Center. And not in the greatest shape. We go in there, and the toilets were soon overflowing, and the water was not drinkable, and it was not in very good shape. But there we were, and we didn't know why. And it was because they didn't want to spend the money feeding us and taking care of us in jail, but they wanted to teach us a lesson. And the leaders of this group were very nervous that somebody would come and bomb the place, and knowing we were all there. So it was dangerous. But to keep our spirits up, we did all kinds of things. We had people from the committee, which was an improv group, and we did improvisations. And of course, the little girls, the local girls with their hair in pink curlers, led us in songs. And there were a couple of ministers who talked about keeping our spirits up. And it was really quite a performance what went on there, how we amused ourselves until it got to be about midnight. And it's time to turn in. Now, the downstairs was a cement floor, and upstairs was where the pool table and the ping pong table and all those things. And they said the women will be upstairs, the men downstairs. And everybody said, why is that? They said, because there's rumors that we have all kinds of sexual misbehavior going on, and we don't want to add to it. So we accepted that, and I slept on the pool table night out with my jacket as my pillow. It was not that uncomfortable, actually. When you're tired, nothing is uncomfortable, I think. So the next morning, we got the okay that somebody came there and said we could go, and we marched proudly back to Brown's Chapel and disbanded. Well, the day came for the march. Now, this was a wonderful event because we went along the road, and it was very weird. We had helicopters overhead buzzing around. We had the State Guard or whatever it was there they had Confederate patches on their shoulders with rifles all along the way, and we're marching. This is a strange environment in the United States. One of the people in our group had been in Vietnam, and he freaked out because of the helicopters, and we had to take care of him. It was a real problem. So we marched, and we marched 9 miles, and then we find ourselves disbanding, and somebody said something about the way to get back now is by the train. Well, I didn't know where the train was. I was by myself. I should have taken Barbara, found somebody it never occurred to me. I was with all these wonderful people when we were walking. Despite the ominous environment and everybody taking our pictures too, it was joyous. I was with people, we were one, and we were thrilled to be doing this. We felt that this was a great moment in history. Well, we disband, and there's no plan to get back, and there's this big open field, and I started to panic as people left. I didn't know how I was going to get back to Selma. I see a nice black limousine with 3 very nice-looking black gentlemen in the car, and I thought, well, I'll be safe with them. They said, do not ride with any white people, no matter what. So I go up to the car, and I'm looking pretty grubby. We haven't had showers, so really kind of grubby. And I knock on the door and I say, I wonder if I could get a ride to Selma. And they looked at me very sort of oddly. And I said, well, I'm Claire Isaacs from San Francisco. That was my main name, boasting myself up. So the man in the back seat gave me his name. I later found out he was the treasurer of the state of Connecticut. And then there was a chauffeur, and the man in the passenger seat turns around and says, I'm Ralph Bunch from New York. So I have just hitched a ride with a Nobel Peace Prize winner. For some of you young people, he was a great man in his time in the late 40s and 50s and early 60s, and I think, if not the first, maybe one of the very first African Americans to receive that Peace Prize, and it was a great honor, and I was terrified because I thought, what have I done? So we drive back to Selma, and we go to a house. We go up the steps into the house, and we're received by a Dr. and Mrs. Jackson in this house, who were very nice to me. And they said, we have this girl, she needed a ride. So then there was a big debate as to what to do with me. I mean, they didn't know. And eventually, after some talk and a little bit of a begrudging spirit, Dr. Bunch agreed that he and the chauffeur would drive me back to Mrs. White's place, and that's what they did. And they drove, and as we drove into the poorest part of Selma, I think he saw what it was like there. The streets were dirt, dust in the summer, mud in the winter, absolutely no sidewalks, no streetlights. And we came to a place where there was a train, woo, 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 down the tracks. Pretty soon it was in front of us, and we were boxed in. And this is a place where there were no lights. There wasn't even a signal gate there. That's what it's like when you don't have a vote. The town, it was a mess. And we're sitting there, and I'm thinking, this is really dangerous. So I got down under the seat, because I realized that a white woman plus two black men might cause a major disaster for us. So we drove up to the house, and I got out and ready to go in, and I felt, I've got to take advantage of this situation. This is incredible. And so I said, Dr. Bunch, do you think there'll ever be any brotherhood between white and black in America? And there was this long pause, and he said to me, I'm not interested in brotherhood. I'm interested in respect. And you know something? He was right. I was a little dumbfounded at this and sort of sluck into the house, told everybody about it, and they said, calm down, because I felt that he had missed the spirit of what we were trying to do. But as my life has gone on, I've realized he was right on point. That's the way it was. So there I was, and they finally had kind of a farewell dinner. I don't know where they got the food. We had a real southern feast with chicken and all the makings that you have, and party, a bunch of people in the neighborhood, some of us who from California and some other people. And it was at that party that I donated to the hostess this little bag of coins from the Pentecostal church with a little speech. And eventually I got back to California. The years went by. I thought so much about this. It was a great experience. And as the years went by, I began to wonder if there'd ever be a 50th anniversary and whether I'd live to see it. And by God, I did. And there was in 2015. So I decided I would go back. I would go back to Selma, and I didn't really know how to do this. I couldn't seem to get a reservation anywhere in Selma. I could get a plane that takes you to Texas, and then you go to Montgomery, and then there's no public transportation between Montgomery and Selma at all, no bus, nothing. But I figured I'd manage somehow. I'd rent a car, maybe. At any rate, and finally I decided to call the Chamber of Commerce, and I talked to this very nice person there, and she said, you really got to talk to Rwanda. I said, who is Rwanda? Well, you just have to talk to her. This is her phone number. So I call her, and we start talking, and she starts telling me how she has this house that's so full of memories of great things that happened during the civil rights movement, that all these people stayed there, and it was so great. And she described it. I said, could you describe that house? So she did, and she said, what is your last name? She said, Jackson. I said, is your father a Dr. Jackson? She said, he was a dentist. Yes, he was Dr. Jackson. He was head of the Dental Society of the colored dentists, in that area. And by God, that was the same house I'd been in 50 years earlier. I still get chills thinking about it. It was so amazing. So we became very friendly. I ended up over in Montgomery staying for a couple of days with a woman who was doing PR and video, and she put me on the local television and on radio, and a college radio and all this, because it was, and even on NPR, because we were what they call foot soldiers. Not the famous people who went, but just the people who did like I did, and there were a lot of them who just showed up and came. And I still remember that finally I spent several days there. There was a big gathering at the synagogue, and some of the great preachers of the black churches in the South came to preach, and there were synagogue, there were rabbis. Then Peter of Peter, Paul, and Mary was there playing his guitar and with us, and it was terrific. I mean, there were all kinds of things happening. Went to a mayor's dinner, and I was a guest, an honored guest, and then the press said, well, we understand there's some people here who are foot soldiers. We want you to all line up. So they lined us up and took our picture, and I ended up on the front page of the Selma Times. And I was with a mixed crowd of people from all over who'd done what I'd done. At any rate, it came to an end. I realized I had to go home, but I asked Rwanda, we talked a while, and I said I never quite understood why everybody was so uneasy about my being in this house and so anxious to get me out. And she said, didn't you understand what was happening? I said, no. She said, Martin Luther King was on his way here. Martin Luther King was on his way to stay with him. It turned out that this house was a house that's been written up in a book called The House by the Side of the Road, because you see, There are no hotels or restaurants that would take black people during the 1960s. They stayed at this house, and the Jacksons made food for them, and they had conferences, and they did strategizing. I heard all kinds of funny stories about how they all sat on one bed and it collapsed. And Abernathy was on that. He was a large man, you know. It was amazing. And so it was a very beloved house, and she kept it as it had been for 50 years with the same pictures on the wall and everything. It really was a museum, and many, many people came there. And it was, you know, it was an amazing experience. And then she said, you know, I just knew him, I was 5 years old, and I just knew him as Uncle Marty, and I used to sit on his knee. And that was the end of my return to Selma after the 50 years I'd spent there. Thank you very much.
How old were you when you went to Selma?
32. 32.
Oh, 32.
Yeah,
That's the first time.
Yes.
Yeah, did you experience much anti-Semitism in your
Not there, no. Not at all. No, we were all together in it. There were, you know, not at all. Oh, I forgot to tell you one very funny story, because it wasn't all civil rights. One day, a young native of the city, young African American, came and asked Barbara and I to come with him, go dancing. So we said, well, all right. And we go to this place, and it's all black, and there's some great music, and we were the first whites to integrate the sugar shack of Selma. No, I didn't get any discrimination at all there. No, not at all. Somebody over here have their hand up? Okay, well, thank you very much for your listening.
It's just amazing what the things that went on in San Francisco as well as in Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Our next person who's going to be coming up here is Linda Moore, and she's going to be portraying Dorothy Height. Dorothy Height, she was born in 1912 in Richmond, Virginia, and then her parents moved to Rankin, Pennsylvania when she was 5 years old. And in Rankin, Pennsylvania, she went to integrated schools. When she graduated, she had applied to Barnard, is that right? Barnard in New York. But when she got there, they told her, oh, I'm sorry, we only allow 2 Negroes into the school per year. So she went to NYU and later to Columbia for graduate school. And at some point, Barnard apologized and gave her an honorary degree. But she became a woman who was, for 40 years, the president of the National Council of Negro Women. And one of the things she did with Selma was back in the 60s, she had 2 white women, another black woman, and they drove down to Selma all the way through the segregated areas together in the same car, and they went around Selma to look at the conditions there. Another thing that she did for Mississippi, she had Wednesdays in Mississippi, where she would have women from the North and women from Mississippi meet together to talk about what was going on in Mississippi.
Yeah.
She was a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. She advised President Eisenhower. She told President Lyndon B. Johnson, you need to hire some black people in your government, and he did. Barack Obama said that she is the godmother of the civil rights movement. So now we have Linda Moore, who loves storytelling. It is her passion. And she loves to look at women who have done a great service to our country. And she herself, her aunt used to tell them stories on their back porch, and she would be sitting there listening. And she really feels that she got her storytelling genes from her aunt. And storytelling gives her meaning. She likes to connect with her audience. She talks about our fears, about prejudice, about homelessness, love, and healing. So Linda Moore, we have a very special treat to have her come up here to portray Dorothy Height as a teenager.
Oh, good afternoon. Good afternoon. You know, it was a pivotal moment when I was in high school. And the first thing that I learned was about racism. The second thing I learned was how to stand on your feet in confidence in 10 minutes. And the last thing I learned is how to keep the peace with myself. My name is Dorothy Irene Heights. I am 15 years old. My teacher was named Mrs. Moore, Mary Moore, and my principal was named Mr. Stratford. And I had just won the Western Pennsylvania Rankin High School contest for impromptu speech. It was a big deal. Of course, they had me going to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to the Capitol. I just loved it. I was so excited about that. Everything was looking well. I lived in a small rolling mill town where they had a population of 95% white. My teacher and principal had decided that they would help me and drive to the state capitol for me to be in the contest. God, I was excited. And my mother had made a white dress, just in case you didn't notice, for the occasion for me to go that evening. So the principal and my teacher came and they chatted a while with my mother, and then we got in the car and was ready to go. Of course, my mother said, I just want to tell you, Dorothy, whatever you do, keep it together, baby. You just have to keep it together. Okay, Mama. So we drove, Mr. Stratford drove to Harrisburg. And when we got to the hotel, he went in to check on his reservations. And then he came back out and he called Mrs. Moore, and they went back in to check on the reservations. Well, then Miss Moore comes back out. Now, Miss Moore was a lovely person. She smiled all the time. But when she got upset, she backed that lower lip. She let you know something was wrong. So she came out of the hotel biting her lip. I knew something was wrong. She was going back and forth. Dorothy, they said that we can't be in that room. They said that they didn't recognize that we had a Negro girl. They said, absolutely, we cannot have you in this room. I just don't know what I'm going to do, Dorothy. I'm just upset. I wasn't expecting this. Oh my God, I got to get you something to eat. We're going to Carnegie Hall. I got to find you someplace to dress. Oh, this is getting on my nerve, Dorothy. I looked over at Mr. Stratford. He had his head hanging down, red as a beet, not saying anything. I thought, oh. But then I remembered what my mother said. Dorothy, no matter what, keep yourself together. That's all I needed. I told Miss Moore, we got this. All we have to do is go to a delicate contestant, get a sandwich and some milk, and then we can drive straight to Carnegie Hall, and I could get dressed in the ladies' room, and then come out and be prepared. Well, that's right, Dorothy. I'm so glad you thought of that. Well, when we got to the place, there were 17 contestants, and each one of them had to draw a number to show which place in line they were going to be. I drew number 17. That means I would be last. That's good or bad. It was good because I would be in the judge's mind as their last decision. And it was bad because I was going to be waiting a long time for my turn. You see, the students had to get subjects, and you had to know that subject because you go on stage 10 minutes after they give it to you. You got to know what you're doing, you got to be confident, and you got to get out there and deliver. So, I was standing off stage, breathing, relaxing. Finally, they called my assignment. And the subject was the Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact. Now, this was among 60 nations who signed the treaty in August 1926. They were rejecting war as a national policy. Well, right after that, 10 minutes later, I had to step on stage. I looked around, and there seemed to be 2,000 to 3,000 people. But there was only one colored person in the back by the exit by himself, and he was smiling at me. I thought, well, there's one. I had been doing assessment of the League of National Policy, and they had a person called Tristide Briand, and he was the main negotiator of the treaty. And he said something. He said that peace could not come by machinery in the world. Peace had to come by people wanting it badly. I said that peace will come in the hearts of all people if we allow it. And that, yes, it will happen, but it won't be soon. It reminded me of 2,000 years ago when they had come to the world with a new peace. However, before that, they had the messenger who was turned away from the inn at his birth. They turned away his parents at the inn. He was, well known. We started to think about the things that he had done 2,000 years ago. The world needs peace. My teachers had helped me to get to another place so that we could talk about being so much better, that when we get peace, and if we don't work for it, we will not have peace everlasting at all. We have to work on peace. While we were talking, we understood that I was in a contest and that the judges had just announced that I was the first prize winner. Oh, was I excited. But when I got there, they told me that there were other things to consider, and so I did. I was so excited. The first thing that happened was that I went to a place where they were helping other people become great. I was so excited to be in the greatness. We learned that people who are dedicated, who are in peace with themselves, can bring that peace to other people. I have been in a place, and my teachers has been in a place, where they turned us away for not being, I guess, the right kind of person, a Negro girl. They turned away my teacher, my principal, and me. It was different. It made me feel different. But thank God I had them, because what they did was share in my experience of humiliation, my spirits of joy, and joy that I was winning. They were responsible for me, and they were so happy. Just earlier in the day, they had turned us away from the facility in Harrisburg. And later that evening, the judges thought it to be important to give me the first prize. Oh, was that great. But they treated us the same way, my instructor and my principal. They turned them away too. But they loved being in the experience of helping me, because they were responsible for me at all times. I loved winning. There's a quote that I remember, that nobody is born hating because of the color of their skin, because of the background of their religion. People learn to hate. And if you can learn to hate, you can be taught love. Because love is the most common denominator in the human heart. Someday we'll all be free. Someday we'll all be walking hand in hand in this world. Someday we'll be in peace in this country. Someday we will be in a circle of the highest beings. Someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. And that's the end of that story.
Fannie Lou Hamer, she sat in that church in Williams Chapel with her friend Ma Tucker next to her, looking at all these men up there. There's 3 of them. There's Bob Moses and James and another James, and they're up there talking to them about voting. Bob Moses just said that I can register to vote, that it is my constitutional right. I have never heard this before, and I am 44 years old. I I could vote. I could vote who I want to be president, governor. I have this right. I have this power. Oh, when he said, do I have anyone who wants to go on the bus tomorrow morning over to Indianola in order to register to vote? I raised my hand so high, I was ready to go. I was sure ready. Amen. 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 I'm getting on that bus. Amen. Oh, yes, I'm going to Indianola. That next day, I got on that bus. There was 18 of us. And as the bus turned left out of Williams Chapel down Route 49, the Highway Patrol's cars was behind us. And there was white men in their trucks with their rifles pointed at our bus. And they were yelling vile things at us. And the atmosphere of excitement just went down to the ground. Whew. And something inside of me said, I'm not going to let this opportunity to register to vote to be snatched from me. We're going to do this. And I don't sing the way I used to sing back in 1964, but I just started singing this song. And instead of this little Christmas little line, it goes, let my people go. Because you're going to sing with me. And it goes, go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain, that to let my people go. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain, to let my people go. Oh, we were singing that song. We started clapping and shouting. The people got excited again. And then when we got to Indianola, it was like a 26-mile ride in front of the county courthouse where we're supposed to go in to register. There's policemen with their snarling dogs. Bob Moses gets off of the bus and they tell him only 2 of us could come in to register. Well, I can ride on up with my pocketbook and I'm going down them stairs and going up them stairs, and I could write my name, my address, who I work for, D. Marlowe's Plantation, and I passed all my literacy tests, and then there was an oral exam. Do you know anything about an de facto law? Can you explain that to me? Oh, what? A de facto law? I don't know nothing about no de facto law. Well then, you did not pass the test. Come back again. So it did not take that time. And I was disappointed. But the next year, I did come back. And I'm not sure why they did it, but I passed that year. So I got my registration card hanging up in my room. But that year it didn't, and none of us 18 was able to be properly registered. And SNCC, that's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that Bob Moses was leading, and they paid our poll tax, which is $2. Some places in the South, they make black people not only pay for the year that they were born, but if you were 40 years old and you're supposed to start voting at 18, they made you pay $2 for every year. We got back on that bus, and the police stopped us. And he gave the bus driver a ticket. He said he was driving the wrong color of bus. So we all went into our pocketbooks and into our pockets, and we got out enough money for him to be able to pay that ticket. We got on back on that bus, and we went back to Ruleville. Someone drove me the 4 miles to D. Marlowe's Plantation. And when I got out of the car, my husband, Pat, such a good man, and my 2 children who I had adopted, they come running out and they say, "Oh, Fannie Lou, the boss man been here, and he's raising Cain. Someone called him and told him that you were trying to register to vote." And before my husband finished speaking, Mr. D. Marlowe himself drove up. "Fannie, Fannie, I heard that you were down there trying to register to vote. Mississippi ain't ready for that. No, if Mississippi ain't ready for it, you got to go back and unregister yourself." Mr. Marlowe, sir, I didn't go down there to register you. I went down there to register me. Ooh, I had to get off of that plantation right away. And my husband took me over to Ma Tucker's, and I was in her house, and about 10 days later, he comes and says, "You can't stay here any longer. Something bad is about to happen to you." Because you see, if a black person in the South went to try to register to vote, it was printed in the newspaper. Their name, their address, their employer. So 10 days later, there were 16 bullets went through Ma Tucker's house in the room where I would have been sleeping in. And late in that night, there was 2 Negro girls who were hurt by gunshots, and another man as well. But Pappy took me up to Summer, Mississippi to get me away. No one was going to hire me anymore. I don't know what I was going to do. And D. Marlowe told Pap that he was going to have to get off the plantation once the harvest was in. So I was hiding out. But the SNCC folk kept thinking about me. And they said, "Boy, I sure liked how that Fannie Lou Hamer was singing on the bus and got everybody riled up and ready to go in there to register. We need to recruit her." So Charles McLaren, he was part of SNCC, he found me. Because I was going from house to house and hiding out all different places. And about 2 months later, he come knocking on my door and he said, "Fannie Lou?" "Yes, Mr. McLaren. How would you like to be a civil rights worker? I want to take you up to Tennessee to get you some training." Ooh. Give me a minute to pack my bags. I'm ready. So off she went. And when she came back to Ruleville, oh, she would sing and she would shout, and all of Sunflower County would just rise up and sing with her when she was leading those mass meetings. And one of the best things that she would ever sing that she was really well known for is, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. In the jailhouse, I'm gonna let it shine. In the jailhouse, I'm gonna let it shine. In the jailhouse, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. In the jailhouse. Well, the next year, I was in South Carolina doing a voter registration drive over there in a citizenship class. There was 8 of us. And we were coming back on the Continental Trailway bus. And we came back into Mississippi. And we stopped in Montgomery County, the county that I was born in. Two of our people went into the restaurant at the bus terminal to try to get something to eat. The others went over into the restroom. There was no colored-only restroom at this place. And the women who were in the restaurant were chased out by the police chief and another police officer. And then the next thing I know, while I'm sitting on the bus, here comes some police cars, and they're going in there, ushering out from the restroom the 5 who went in there. And then they go, the 2 who were in the restaurant, and they put her in the cars, and I'm coming out of the bus. Some say maybe I should have just stayed on the bus, but I had to go and find out what was happening to my people. And I got off that bus, and then there was a man sitting in the car and said, "Get that one, get that big one right there." And they came and said, "You're under arrest." And they took me to the car, and they kicked me. And I got in there, and they took us over to the Winona booking, to the jailhouse. And in the booking room, they were taking our pictures, they were getting our personal information. And one by one, they were taking my people into the different jail cells. And I could hear the lickings. I could hear the screamings. I could hear the lickings and the horrible screamings. I'm in my 40s, but there's some in our group who are in their 60s. And there's a young girl, June, who's 15 years old. Then it was my turn. They took me by my arms into a cell where there were 2 Negro prisoners. And they had me lie on my stomach on the cot. And the highway patrolman told the first Negro prisoner to beat me with his belly jack. And he gave that stick to that prisoner, and he went, and he kept beating me, and the highway patrolman would tell him to go over here, and to go over here, and to go over here, and to beat me here, and to beat me there. And he beat me until he was exhausted. Then the highway patrolman gave the billy jack to the other Negro prisoner, and he began to beat me. And my dress started to go up, and I started to try to pull it back down, but there was a white man sitting there, and he said, "Leave it be." And then my legs, I started to work my legs because I had polio when I was 6. And there was a time when I was a child when I had fallen and had broke my leg, but there was no doctor to set it, so I always had a limp, so I was trying to protect it. So I was moving my legs, and that white man said, "Don't move your legs." And he told one of the prisoners, the other prisoner, to sit on my legs so I couldn't work my legs. And then I started to scream. And the man hit me in my face, and he said, "Hush." I was in prison, in that jailhouse, when Medgar Evers, the NAACP representative in Jackson, Mississippi, was gunned down in his driveway. He usually comes in and gets across his car, out, and goes into his kitchen door. But that night, he got out of his driver's side, and he didn't know that there was a man by the name of James Beckwith in the bushes with a high-powered rifle aimed at his heart. Just took one shot, and Medgar Evers was gone. SNCC, they sent in a man with our bail, but the police officers beat him and then turned him over to the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, that night. I won't say what they did to him, but he did survive. Finally, Andrew Young and a couple other women, they're all dressed really nice. They come to that jailhouse, and they release us into their care. And Andrew Young, it's like when he saw us, our faces are swollen, our lips are broken, we have bruises, our clothes are in tatters. No doctor has been come to see us. And he takes us to a colored doctor to see us. And I told him, I cannot go home and let Pap see me and my girls. They just cannot see me like this. We could hardly even sit down or even walk. So he took me to Atlanta where he lived. And then later on, he took us to Washington, D.C., when we could sit long enough to go to the Justice Department so they could see what happened to us. And there was a trial, but this is Mississippi. Was anybody found guilty? No, not at all. And that could have stopped me. I could have just said, this is enough, I'm going out, I'm going to the north. But I didn't. I continued to work in Ruleville, going around, sharing. And Bob Moses, he said, we got to do something different. We need some help. And he came up with this idea of Freedom Summer for 1964. He said, in 1963, I'm going to go around to all the prestigious colleges in the United States. Now, Bob Moses himself had went to Harvard for graduate school. And he had taught at a prestigious school in New York when he realized, we can't be doing this when our people are suffering the way they are suffering in Mississippi. So he went and came down and worked with SNCC there in Mississippi. So he went around to the schools. I went around to the schools. And we wanted white students particularly, whose fathers and mothers were doctors and lawyers, people who were part of the government, governor's children. And we just wanted all these prestigious people so that their hometown newspapers would write up about them and follow them. And that would be part of their protection as they come to Mississippi. Because if you're white and you come to Mississippi and you're going to live with black people, you're not white anymore. You're considered just as black as every other Mississippian. And he knew that there was going to be some hardship for these students, but he wanted them to come. Then they sent just regular flyers, white paper typed up, to all those schools that were not prestigious. They sent something up to a high school in New York, and this senior, Mario Savio, he read that flyer, and he decided to go to Freedom Summer. And that summer he went down to Macomb, Mississippi. And he was setting that place on fire with the freedom schools and things like that. And then when he finished that summer, he went up to UC Berkeley. A couple of months later, I think he was standing on a police car. He started the free speech movement at UC Berkeley. Yes, way to go, Mario. And then at Michigan State University, there was this little petite blonde girl who was wearing these, she told me later, this little skirt, her little skirt and her knee-high socks and her kids' shoes and her sweater. And she was walking on campus and she saw this flyer that talked about Freedom Summer. She went into the office next to her and says, do you have any flyers about this? And the woman said, oh yeah, over there on the shelf. And she went over on the shelf and looked at it and she said, I'm going to Mississippi this summer. And that girl's name was Mary Susan, who we know here in Benicia as Mary Susan Gast. And she looked at that, she said, how am I going to do this? I mean, I got to work in the summer. And she applied, and they interviewed her, and she said, well, I can't put anything in my newspaper. My newspaper, you know, I'm from a rural area. In our newspaper, there was a black couple who were going to buy a house. And so the newspaper printed their name and their address of what house they were going to buy. And it was firebombed like a week or so later. So no, I don't think you want my newspaper to follow what I'd be doing there. And I don't want my parents to know about that I'm going to Mississippi. And I can only stay for 4 weeks. I can't stay for the whole summer because I have to work in order to pay for my college career. So the recruiter said, well, Mary Sue, we'll just put your application on the bottom. I'll get back with you later. So Mary Sue went about her life. But about a month or so later, she got that phone call and said, if you could make your way to Oxford, Ohio, you call this phone number and someone will pick you up and take you to the campus for our training. And she did that. She didn't tell her parents, and I'm not going to say all the things she did to get to Oxford, Ohio. But she was like a secret agent getting there. And that summer turned her life around. She said that when she got on that campus and she turned a corner, there I was singing, and chills went up and down her spine. And she was at the training center when they got news that 3 of their workers, who had been at the first week of the training center for Freedom Summer, had left to go down to Meridian to check out a bombing that had happened of a church where they were going to hold the Freedom School for the children in the neighborhood. And they had disappeared. That was a hard time for all of us. Do we stop the Freedom Summer or do we continue on? Some of the students, they left, but not Mary Sue, not anybody that we know of, like Mario Savio. They stayed and they continued. It took all summer to find out what happened to those men. But those freedom schools, they happened in Ruleville. Hattiesburg had maybe about 10 or 12 of them in all these different churches. They were in Meridian and McCoy, all over Mississippi. There was freedom schools where adults could come and get literacy training. They could learn to read and to do math. And at the schools, they were teaching the children about James Baldwin and Langston Hughes and about Black history, things they had never, ever heard. They were teaching them how to ask questions, not just to be the little submissive, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Oh, it was a great time. And people like Peter Seeger, he came, and Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, they came with like $60,000. Oh, they were chased from the airport all the way to Elks Hall in Hattiesburg, and they were so scared. They'd never been so scared in their life. And Sidney Poitier said that he had never felt so much love as when he was at the Elks Club, bringing all that money in. Oh, he was a big help for the civil rights movement. And Harry Belafonte, I cannot say what that man has done. Oh, God bless his soul. God bless his soul, because he helped so many people. Shirley MacLaine, she would be in my kitchen. She would be stirring the beans. Oh, we had help from so many people all over from the United States to make that summer go. But those young men, Michael Schroeder, Jewish, from New York, Cornell grad. He had actually come along with his wife in January of 1964 to be the first white civil rights workers in Mississippi. Wow. Then there was Andrew Goodman, Jewish, from New York. And he was supposed to be at Pittsburgh and then somewhere else, but Michael Schroeder really wanted him to be down there with him in Meridian. Then there was James Chaney, Negro, Christian. And he was a good friend with Michael Schroeder. They worked together. They were, if you saw one, you saw the other. They were really close friends. All 3 missing as of June 21st. Oh, the parents of all of these sophisticated, rich, white folk, all their parents called Lyndon B. Johnson. You got to find out what happened to these kids. You got to protect my children. And the FBI got involved. J. Edgar Hoover had to come several times to Mississippi. Hundreds of FBI agents were going around. They were taking notes. They're trying to find out what happened to these 3 young men. Silence. Silence. By the end of July, the case began to be cracked. There was a highway patrolman who'd rather be barbecuing rather than being involved with murder. Then there was not an auto repairman, a TV repairman. He began to speak, but he was forced to speak. The FBI had gone up to New York and gotten Mr. X. Because, see, President Johnson was under so much pressure to find out what happened to these young men. And J. Edgar Hoover, he was under pressure as well. They have to crack this case. And hopefully before the Democratic National Convention in mid-August. And they had 200 sailors going through all the rivers and the swamps, and they did find the bodies of some black men, but not any of these men. Well, Mr. X is what we'll call him. He worked for the mafia. He did their assassins. The FBI hired him to come down, and he went to the TV repairman's shop and said, oh, I need to get a TV, and he had some new ones there. So he said, I need some help. Can you help me get this into the car? So the TV repairman come and put it in the trunk of his car. The assassin hit him, put him in the car, took him deep into the woods, and that night took him to the wood shop. By the morning, this guy was singing. And not a song, but singing where the bodies were buried. Then there was a Methodist minister who had joined the Ku Klux Klan because he wanted to be involved with a white Christian organization. But he didn't want murder on his conscience. So he began to talk. Early August, they go to the Jolly Farm. And they bring in a bulldozer. And they begin to dig. With that bulldozer down, down, deep. And after several hours working in that 106-degree humidity of Mississippi, they saw a boot. And they began to scrape away from the boot and to dig away, and it was Michael Schwerner. They dug some more, and it was Andrew Goodman. They dug some more, and it was James Chaney. Now, Andrew and Michael's parents, they didn't trust Mississippi to give a really fair, what would be the word? Autopsy of their sons. So they sent their own doctor down. And he said, Michael shot under his arm right into his heart. James Chaney shot straight right here, but he was alive when he was put into the dam. James Chaney beaten to a pulp, and they believe that when they put him in there first, that they took that bulldozer and bounced it on his body and just ooh and ooh and ooh. He had been shot 3 times because he had tried to run away. The Freedom Summers, everyone mourned when they got the news. We had already knew that they weren't alive. James Chaney, he had his funeral in Meridian. The other 2 had theirs back up in New York. The summer was coming to a close. These men had given their lives, and because of what they did, or what happened to them, their sacrifice did not go wasted. By the end of that summer, Holiday Inn was saying, Negroes, you could come into our hotel. Different restaurants all around Mississippi were saying, you could come and eat in our restaurants, and we will thank you for our business, for your business. Oh, there was change was coming to Mississippi. It was slow and slow, but those 800 white folk who come and did all those things, the Mario Savios, the Mary Susans, all of them made such a difference. through there, the voter registration that summer, it didn't work too well. Most black people were like going, I'm not signing nothing. No, you don't even come on my porch. And my boss man knows that you're on my porch, I'm going to be out of here. So it was slow. But then we had the Freedom Democratic Party, which we had already started. And I was one of the candidates. Oh yes, I had just learned to vote when I was 44, and here I'm 46, I'm trying to run for Congress. I just had to show black people that we could do it. I didn't win, but I was enjoying myself. I sure was. Yes. But we had 63 black folk. There was actually about 4 white folk too. 4 white folk got involved with our movement. And we were going to go to Atlanta City to the National Democratic Convention. And everybody was so upset about it. Lyndon B. Johnson didn't want us to come. Oh my God, he wanted to be voted, and he can't lose the Southern vote. And all of the people from the South, from Texas all the way to Florida, all the way up to Washington, D.C., when they heard that we were planning to come and that we wanted to be seated on the floor as a real Democratic Party, they said, we're going to walk out. So when we got up there to Atlanta City, oh, it was something else. Most of us in our group were sharecroppers, undertaker, barbers. Most had never been to school, illiterate. But we all had a wisdom that no classroom could teach us. Lyndon B. Johnson didn't know what to do with us, and there was all this politicking going behind doors. Thurgood Marshall was there, Martin Luther King was there, and they were telling us afterwards, Fannie Lou, take the 2 seats that they're offering to give you. And I said, no. All 63 of us are tired. We're all sick and tired of being sick and tired. If we all cannot be seated on this floor, then none of us will be seated. And Thurgood Marshall and Dr. King continued to try to get me to accept just 2 of us sitting there. And I asked them, have you ever picked cotton? No, ma'am. No, ma'am. That's all I've got to say. So we did not get seated, but I spoke on national TV, and when Lyndon B. Johnson realized what I was doing, he had the network stop that and have a little interview for himself. But that night, and the next 3 days, I was on national TV talking about that beating that I had, talking about things that had happened to me. And I said in the end, if this is America, I question America. Is this really the home of the free and the brave, where we go to bed with our phones off the hooks because we're scared that our life might be over? Is this really America? Ooh, they didn't know what to do with me. I heard later that all kinds of telegrams went into the White House about, you gotta do something about what's happening in Mississippi. So change was coming, change was coming. Oh, change was really coming.